to show you the process that I went through for my Mother's Day gift for my mom. So I wanted to make her some kind of dessert. So the first thing I had to do was think about what does she like. My mom is not really a big sweets person, kind of like me. She likes things with a lot of acidity. She loves anything citrus, and specifically she loves anything lime, so I wanted to go with that. You know, it's always important when we're making something for someone that we focus on what they like, not what we like. Even if we're lucky for me, it's the same. So for her, I wanted to make a lime tart. So my tart is gonna have 3 main components. So there's gonna be a tart crust, which I'm gonna use a 1-2-3 dough to make, and it's called a 1-2-3 dough just because of the ratios. It's kind of like a short dough. It actually makes a really great cookie as well. So we're gonna make that. And then we're going to make a lime filling, which is delicious and luxurious, and I love it. And it's gonna be a lime curd. So it's gonna be really, really super creamy and super intense lime, which is very important for my mom. And then we're gonna top that off with an Italian meringue. So it's gonna be really sweet and glossy, and then we're gonna torch it at the end. It's gonna have this really great variation with textures from kind of crisp and then creamy and then fluffy, and then also with flavor. So our crust is gonna be nice and buttery, and then our filling is gonna be really tart and acidic, and then our topping is gonna be really, really sweet. So it's gonna be this really awesome dessert. So right now I'm gonna go ahead and show you the process that I did to make this Mother's Day gift. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. So let's make that tart dough. So I already have in here my butter, and then I'm gonna add my sugar. So 1 part sugar to 2 parts butter. And this one I'm gonna add some lime zest to it, because I think that's gonna make it just a little bit extra special, because my mom loves lime. She loves lime in everything. So I'm using this microplane, and I'm just shaving off the very, very bright green part. When you get to that kind of white part, that part, it's really bitter. So this very outside layer has like all these awesome essential oils, and it has all the awesome floral notes that we associate with citrus without really the sour, as much as the sourness. More the acidity is in the juice. So there's just so much flavor. And I'll juice this lime later, so it won't be wasted. You always want to zest your citrus before you juice it. It's much easier to do it in that order than the opposite order. And you could add this in at the end, but it's going to mix in more evenly at this step. And as it creams, the sugar is going to kind of bruise and rub against, and it's going to help release the lime zest. It's going to help release its essential oils, so it's going to be even more packed full of flavor. And I'm going to see how 1 does for me. 1 might be enough for this size batch, and you could do the same thing with lemon or orange or grapefruit. It's all delicious, or you could do some kind of combination. I've definitely done kind of general citrus and done like a lemon, a lime, and an orange. It's all good. So we're gonna get this on the mixer and let it start creaming. So my butter and sugar have been creaming for a while, and all that lime zest is getting knocked around and getting really fragrant, which is awesome. And then I checked to see how much lime zest, if it looked like a good amount. And I thought it might be like right on the line, and I thought to myself, if my mom was here, would she add more lime? And the answer is absolutely yes. So I'm gonna go ahead and add that second lime. So I know that my tart is super crazy and limey for my mother for Mother's Day. Always important to think about exactly what your customers want, not what you want. Having said that, I really love lime, so this wouldn't be problematic for me. But this pastry is not about me, it's about my mom. So I want to make sure it's exactly what she would want. So I'm gonna get that mixed in, make sure we get to light and fluffy, and then we'll go to the next step. So we're at light and fluffy, so now I can start to add my eggs. And whenever you're doing the creaming method, you want to add your eggs gradually. So I have 2 eggs, so I'm going to add them 1 at a time. There goes one, and we want to make sure we're adding them one at a time. Otherwise, the quantity of liquid to quantity of fat is going to cause some separation, and we won't have a true emulsion. So we need to do it slowly so that the emulsifier found in egg yolks, called lecithin, has time to do its job. So we're going to do one egg at a time, and we're going to scrape a couple times, and then we'll get to the second egg. First egg's all incorporated. I scraped the bowl and let it mix some more. So now I'm going to add the second egg and do the same thing again. All the egg is incorporated, so now I can add all of my flour all at once. Now we're gonna have to be careful because we don't want to form too much extra gluten. So we don't want this to be tough, we want it to be nice and tender. When we add a lot of flour, we always want to go on slow speed, and sometimes I like to pulse it so I don't get too much of that flour poofing out. Some might happen, and that's okay. Then I'm going to mix it until it's a complete dough. Okay, so now I need to get this dough chilled. So you can see the texture is pretty soft right now. It's pretty difficult to roll out. So I'm going to get it chilled. At least an hour will be ideal. But more than that is fine too. If you let it go too long, you might have to let it sit on the counter for 10 or 15 minutes so it's not rock hard when you try to roll it out. So I'm gonna get this all onto my saran wrap, and then I'll show you how to wrap it up. Okay, I got my dough on my saran wrap, and this is actually not all of my dough because I won't need it all, and this is probably even more than I need. Typically, you want to wrap it up in sections of exactly what you're going to need. So if I was making multiple tarts, each dough packet would be 1 tart's worth. And that's just going to make life easier. I want a little bit heavy because I haven't done this recipe for the size pan I have at home. So I want to make sure I had plenty, since I've never done this before, this dough in this pan. And I know that these make awesome cookies, so it's not going to be the end of the world if I have a couple or a little bit of extra dough. So eventually I'm going to want to roll this into a round shape. So I want to make this, I want to make this into a round shape because that's just going to make life easier. It's easier to get to a round. If you start a round, if we were trying to make a square tart, you'd want to make this square. And then again, flat like this is going to help it cool quicker and more even than if I had left it in that big ball. I'm going to put it in my refrigerator somewhere it can be flat. If I put it up like that, again, it's going to be hard to roll it out flat because it's going to be curved and weird. So somewhere flat where it can rest for at least an hour. Any longer than that, you'll have to let it set out on the counter for 10 or 15 minutes until it's a little bit softer to be able to roll out. My dough has chilled actually overnight, and I let it sit out for maybe about 15 minutes. It's still a little firm, which is good because the firmer it is right now, the easier it's going to be worked with. As we work with it, it's going to get softer and softer. So I don't want it to be too soft, because then when I start to work with it, it'll get really, really soft and hard to work with. So I'm going to get a little flour down. And remember, if we flick our wrist, we get a really even coverage as opposed to just dropping it down on the table. I don't want a lot of flour, because I don't want to work a lot of flour into my dough, but I do want enough so it doesn't stick. And I can take my dough out of the plastic wrap. And you can see all those nice little limes speckles. I think it looks really pretty. I'll put just a little bit on top as well so it doesn't stick to the rolling pin, just a little bit. And you find if it sticks, you You can add a little bit more, but I like to add it as I go and as I need it, not a ton at the beginning. So the first little bit of rolling is going to seem like nothing's really happening. And if it's still a little cold, you can actually kind of take your rolling pin and give it a little beating. And that's going to help it warm up. So as we go, we want to rotate the dough so we get a nice, even roll. A little more flour on top. And you can see it's starting to roll a little bit more now. And I am getting some cracking on the edges, and that is okay. So this dough isn't incredibly flexible, and especially because it's cold, it's not going to be flexible. So you are going to get this cracking. So as I go, I just kind of smooch it back together, and it'll crack again, and I'll smooch it back together again. And that is okay. Because if it cracks when it goes into the tart, we can do the same thing. We can just smooch it back together. Not a problem. So. We can just keep going. And it'll keep getting a little bit softer as we go. And I am using a decent amount of force right now. But again, it's much easier to get it into our tart mold when it's a little cold versus a little too warm. Again, I can just bring those cracks back together. Maybe a little bit of flour on top, just barely any. So I don't want to dry out my dough by adding a lot of flour. And again, just making sure as I roll out that I'm keeping it as even as I possibly can. And I do want my tart dough to be pretty thin because it's going to be a lot easier for someone to eat if the crust is nice and thin. That's a telltale sign of a skilled baker is a very thin tart crust. So obviously I still have a little ways to go to get this thin enough. And another reason we turn it every once in a while, so mine actually just started to stick a little bit. So if I turn it every once in a while, I can feel it just when it starts to stick, and I can get a little more flour underneath there. If I didn't turn it, it would really, really stick, and then I probably wouldn't be able to get it up, and then I'd have to ball it all back up and roll it all back out, and then by that time it'd be soft, so I'd have to refrigerate it again, and that would be really frustrating, and I'd probably work more flour into it because it'd have flour on the table still. So we definitely want to stop and turn it all the time. And as we're rolling out, we can check to make, whoops. No problem there. I can just smooch that back together too. Nobody will know, except for you guys. So, this is the tart pan I'm going to use. So, I want it to be as wide as this, plus the height on both sides in all directions. So, this way is technically big enough. This way, not quite, but it still is a little thick, so I do definitely need to keep rolling. You can see it's gotten a lot softer now, so it's a lot easier for me to roll out now, but it's still pretty firm as well. Again, any little cracks, we just smooch them together. All right, I'm pretty close to the thinness I want. I also don't want it like paper thin, because then it won't be able to hold itself up. So you kind of gotta get a good balance. So I'm looking probably for like 1/8 of an inch thick. For a bigger tart, you need it a little bit thicker. If I was making little individual tarts, I'd probably want to go even thinner than this. But this is going to need to hold a little bit more weight on the sides. So I'm going to go just like that. And that is good. And I can double check the size. So again, I want it to be the width of the bottom plus the height on this side and this side. So that would put me at about here and here. And then always want to check all the way around. So I am all ready. I don't have to do anything to this pan. And this pan's really nice. It's got a removable bottom, which is going to make life easier when I go to take this out. You don't have to use a removable bottom pan for a tart. In class, we actually use cake pans, which work just fine. This is a little bit easier to work with. And then when I serve it, if I wanted to, I could serve it on this bottom, and it just holds up a little bit nicer. But you don't have to have this. This is just one I happen to have. Actually, it was my mom's. She gave it to me, so that's how you return the favor right there, right? You make mom a tart. So I'm gonna get this ready to go, and I'm gonna have to work fast. So I'm gonna put this dough over my rolling pin, and then I'm gonna pull this in and drape the dough over top. So here we go. I'm gonna roll it over. Then I'm gonna lift it up, look at this side, make sure it's covered, and then drop it in. And if it breaks a little bit, again, no worries. So this part broke off because, you know, I kind of went a little slow trying to tell you what to do. That's okay. I can just kind of paste it back together. No one will ever know. So as I go in here, I don't really want to push in. I want to lift up and push down to get into the bottom corner. That bottom corner is pretty important, certainly for aesthetic reasons, but also structurally, it's kind of going to hold the most weight. And a lot of people just like to push in here, which will stretch out your dough. And if it's stretched out, it's thinner. And we already made it, you know, pretty much as thin as we could, which means if we stretch it out anymore, it won't be sturdy anymore. So when we first get that dough in, we wanna, here, I can patch this guy. Oh, see, no one ever knew. Never happened. Then I can keep going all the way around, lift and push down, lift and push down all the way. I have a little spot right here that didn't get covered, no worries. Just put in a piece of dough, not worried about that. Not worried at all. And then once it's in place, that's when I can start to press it into the sides, because mine had those fluted sides. So you definitely want to kind of push it in, so make sure you get those fluted. You'll notice I didn't do anything to prepare these pans. You don't actually have to grease a pan for tart dough, which is really nice. It'll release on its own. Very, very convenient, so you don't ever have to worry about if you're going to get like this kind of greasy tart or anything. It's really, really nice. All right, so there's a couple ways that you can trim off the edges. You could use a paring knife. And clean off the edges like that. Some people will use their rolling pin to clean off the edges. It's kind of whatever you prefer. The rolling pin is kind of nice because, well, you already have it, but that only works if you have a really, really sharp tart pan edge. So if it was like you were trying to use a cake pan because you didn't have a tart pan, the rolling pin's not really going to cut it very well. But this is nice because you already had it out, and that means you don't have to wash another dish, and we all know we don't want to wash any dishes we don't have to wash. So I'll just go through and make sure that the thickness all the way around the edges is the same. So some of these areas are a little thick, so I'm just going to thin it out by pressing down on it. Then I can take my rolling pin and just trim that extra off. great. Now we have kind of reactivated the gluten in our tart dough. And tart doughs have a tendency to shrink if the gluten's too activated, and they should always shrink a little bit anyway, but we don't want it to shrink too much. So I'm actually going to put this back in the refrigerator, or you could put it in the freezer to chill it back down. So this is probably going to be in the refrigerator maybe 20-30 minutes before I get it in the oven. So definitely don't feel like you need to throw out any excess dough. So this dough makes awesome cookies. They're really great because it's that kind of cookie that doesn't spread. So if you want to make a specific shape, for my students, this is the exact same dough we'd use for our Icing Smiles cookies. So if you want to bake these into, you know, whatever cookie cutter shapes you have at home, they would be delicious. So definitely don't throw these out. And if you're like, I don't want to make cookies right now, this dough freezes really well. So you could just take this and wrap it up, and then, you know, in a week or two or whatever, maybe even a couple months, you're like, you know what, I really want some awesome cookies. Pull this out, put it in the fridge the night before usually, and then you can thaw it out or soften it rather on the counter for a couple minutes, 15-20 minutes, and then roll it out just like we did. Punch out your little shapes and bake it. So definitely don't throw this dough out. It is not trash. So my tart has chilled in the freezer for about half an hour, and my oven is preheated, so I'm ready to go in the oven. But before I do that, I want to prick some holes into the bottom of my tart, and that's just going to help some steam escape so it doesn't have any chance of bubbling. So I'm going to do that with a fork. You could use a paring knife. That'd be fine, but I'm just going to go through and poke some holes. And you don't have to worry about there being holes in your tart and your filling coming through the bottom. I'll show you that later, how we're going to make sure that doesn't happen. Another thing you can do is called blind baking, where you line the bottom with parchment and you put some sort of weight. There are pie weights you can use, dried beans, dried rice. In the industry, often I would use sugar. That's going to help any kind of poofing that might happen. But just because, honestly, I only have one tart to do, I'm just going to watch it. And if you want to do the same, basically what I'm going to do is every once in a while I'm just going to check on it. If I see any kind of area where it might pocket up or anything, all you really have to do is kind of put, usually if you just push it down, that's all you need to do. Or you can come back and poke another little hole in it, and it'll let the steam escape so you don't have any weird holes. You just have to check it early enough that it's not set. So just check it periodically. That's what I'm going to do because it's a little bit easier. And I don't have any pie weights or anything like that here at my house. So I'm just going to keep an eye on it. And if I do get any pocketing, I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so I checked on it, and I do have a little bit of an air bubble that you can see. So I'm just going to poke another hole in it, and then just like that, it deflates. So I'm going to continue to check on it because I may have more air bubbles develop, but that's going to keep me safe. So our tart has come out of the oven, and you can see it's pulled away from the sides, which means it's going to be very easy to get out. So you see how we kind of have some golden color on the edges, and then also in the center. That is exactly what we're looking for. So this guy is ready. So we're going to make a moisture barrier. So my tart is mostly cooled. It doesn't have to be super cool for this next step, but I'm going to create a moisture barrier. So over time, wet fillings can make our crust really soggy, which is not what we want. We want there to be a really good contrast in textures. So a really awesome trick that a lot of pastry chefs use is brushing your tart shell with white chocolate. And it's just a really thin coat, and you can use white chocolate or dark chocolate, kind of depends on whatever, you know, flavor your tart is. But just gently brushing this over is just, as this chocolate sets up, is going to create just a moisture barrier. And your tart shell still over time will get soggy in the refrigerator. So this isn't like going to fix all the problems, but it's going to make sure it lasts a little longer, which is really great because a lot of times it's hard, you know, to make the tart at the exact right moment for your guest or your customer. So this kind of helps with that. So and depending on the quality of chocolate you have when you melt it, it could be a little thinner This is not the best quality chocolate that I have at my house, so it's a little thick, so it's gonna take me a little while to get this all brushed on the bottom. You can also brush it up the sides. You just wanna be careful that whatever you do, you're not gonna be able to see, because sometimes it can look a little sloppy. So I'm just gonna brush this all over. So once I got it brushed over, I just take a little offset special while it's still a little warm. Then I can actually get that layer even thinner. So it's really, really delicate, so you're not like eating through this like giant hunk of chocolate. So I can just do that all the way nice and thin. Again, this is optional, but it definitely is gonna help your tart crust stay nice and crisp longer. My lime curd filling. So basically I'm gonna add everything but my butter into my bowl. So here's my egg yolks and my egg. I'm just gonna whisk these together. You could strain these in advance to get the chalazi out, and the chalazi is that little white piece that holds the egg yolk in suspension. But I'm actually gonna strain it at the end, so I'll get those out then, so that's fine. I'm gonna add my eggs in. And this is a type of custard because the main thickener is eggs. So custards are anything that's thickened by eggs. So like a pastry cream would be a custard. Ice creams, a lot of ice creams are custard because they're thickened with eggs. And then the baked things like creme brulee or cheesecake, those are all thickened by eggs as well. So those are all custards. There's two different kinds of custard, stirred and baked custards. This is stirred custard because we're gonna stir it on the stovetop. Baked custards are baked in the oven, like our cheesecake and our creme brulee. So in goes our eggs, and then our sugar. Lots of sugar in this recipe because lime is super acidic, so you need a lot of sweetness to kind of balance that out. Pretty important to this recipe. Get that all mixed together. You do want to whisk it really well to make sure you don't have any like clumps of egg white anywhere, because you don't want scrambled egg white tart. That would be terrible. And then now I'm going to add my lime juice. And this could just as easily be lemon juice, and you could make this into a lemon tart. That would be totally fine. And actually, my filling is going to turn out yellow. Most people kind of associate green with lime because limes are green, but the juice is very, very barely green. And because egg yolks are so yellow, and my egg yolks are even extra yellow because they come from my brother's farm, this is actually going to maybe look a little bit more like a lemon tart. So now that I've got everything mixed together, I'm going to turn up the heat to about a medium, and I'm going to stir this until it starts to thicken, and I want to watch it really closely. And I really want to, when I'm stirring, make sure I'm going down the sides, the corners, everywhere, because I don't want my egg to sit anywhere for too long, because that's when we risk the scrambled egg stuff. So we don't want that. So what's going to happen as this comes slowly to a high temperature, the eggs are going to coagulate. So those proteins are going to come together and become more solid, but the addition of sugar actually stops them from becoming that like really scrambled. So instead we get this really creamy, smooth mixture. So not only does sugar add for taste, it also adds for texture, which is really awesome. So we're gonna heat this up until it thickens really nicely. So hopefully you can see it's getting a little bit thicker. I know sometimes it's kind of hard to see, but that's a great sign. So as it gets thicker, I definitely want to be sure that I'm really stirring it. And if you want to be super duper safe, you can take the temperature and make sure that your eggs have reached the proper cooking temperature. But I know that as it gets thick, exactly like you're seeing now, so since I've started talking, look how thick it's gotten. I know that if it's gotten this thick, that it's reached the correct temperature. So just like that, it's really changed in texture pretty drastically. So once it gets here, and you might even see like a little bit of kind of bubbling up. If I stop, see there's one. So that means I am definitely at a safe temperature. Whoops. So I can turn this off, and I still want to keep it moving. because the pan's still hot and I don't want to have any kind of scrambled egg nonsense. And then I can start to add my butter slowly. So that's gonna do two things. It's gonna help cool it down quicker, so we're not worried about our eggs being at an unsafe temperature for too long. But it's also gonna melt our butter, which is really, really great. At high temperatures, our butter could have split, so that's why we wanna add it later. And then just as it melts, I'm just gonna add a little bit more until I've added all of my butter in. Just keep on stirring so it's all nice and mixed together. And it looks so pretty and creamy and lemony, even if it's limey. And then once that's all done, we're gonna add the lime zest. You don't wanna cook lemon or lime zest at a super high heat if you can help it. It just kind of breaks down some of the flavors. In our tart dough, obviously we couldn't help it because we needed to bake it, but here we can, so we're gonna add that here at the end. And it's totally optional. It definitely helps add a really big boost of flavor. Let's start with that and see how that is. But some people are not a huge fan of the texture. So it just really depends on what you want. I have no problem with the texture, especially if you have a really fine microplane. It's really not a problem at all, texture-wise. If you had a bigger grater, it might be more of a problem and you might not like that as much. So I definitely would only do this if you had a really fine microplane. Right, so that's all my zest. So now it's time to get this into my tart. All right, so time to go in. So I'm gonna strain this just in case I have any scrambled eggs, and honestly, I don't really think I do, but it will also get out that chalazi, so I'm gonna strain it right in. And it will probably get most of my lime zest out. So again, if that's the texture that you're not really a fan of, then that lime zest is gonna come out for the most part of this step. But even in that short amount of time of being in our filling, infusing with that heat has really infused that lime zest flavor even more. So even if you strain it all out right here, you definitely still are gonna have the impact of the flavor. And since I'm making this for my mom, and my mom loves everything lime, I wanna get as much lime flavor as I can. So I'm gonna grab my spatula and just help coax the rest of this filling in. And some of my lime zest is coming through, my smaller pieces. Some of the bigger pieces are staying behind, that's okay. If you want your lime zest to stay in, strain your eggs before you start cooking to get that chalazi out. But if you do get any kind of sort of scrambled eggs when you're making your filling, you're definitely gonna wanna do this part. So you can see these little white pieces in there. That's the chalazi, the protein strand that holds our egg yolk in suspension into our egg white. So again, it's not the end of the world. You know, as pastry chefs, we do get pretty nitpicky. It can be kind of a weird texture if you get it. Again, actually that one's really big. It's probably the biggest one I've ever seen. Usually they're pretty small. So it's not really super noticeable, especially because, you know, this tart's gonna have multiple textures. But as pastry chefs, we are perfectionists, so we want it to be perfect. So I'm gonna get all this off the sides and then I'm gonna spread it out with my spatula. Okay, I'm just gonna take my offset spatula and spread it out all nice and evenly across my tart. And this lime curd is packed with super awesome limey flavor. So even though it might look like a thin layer, it's gonna be super acidic and super awesome, which is exactly what my mom loves in a dessert. You know, some people are really huge sweet tooths, which is great, but not everyone is. And I would say my mom is definitely not someone who has a huge sweet tooth, but she loves things with lots of acidity, so that is what I have made for her today. Great, so this is already starting to set up some because we've cooked it, but now we're gonna chill it and it's gonna set up even further. So as it chills, those proteins in the egg are gonna set and get a little firmer, as well as the butter because right now the butter is in a melted state. As it chills, it's gonna go back to a solid form. So when this is completely chilled through, we're gonna be able to slice it, and that curd is gonna hold its shape really nicely. So we're gonna get this in the fridge for a couple hours. So it's time to make our Italian meringue, which means we're gonna have a little bit of multitasking to do. So in my pot over here, I've got sugar and some water, bring it up to a boil, and I'm gonna cook that to 240 degrees. And then in my mixer, I have egg whites that have been coming to room temperature. In the center, I have just some clean water with a paintbrush, and I'll show you what to do with that here in a second. But soon we're gonna have the sugar going and the eggs going at the same time. The timing is pretty important for our Italian meringue. So we're gonna see how, when sugar is kind of tricky. So sugar is granulated, right? Sugar wants to be granulated. What we're doing is we're forcing it to be a liquid state, but it wants so bad to be granulated. So as this comes to a boil, we can stir it, but we want to stir it really, really gently. Because if those sugar granules go up the sides of the pot and then later fall in once it's all dissolved, it can start this chain reaction where all of our sugar turns back into crystal, which is not at all what we want. We want it to stay in that liquid form so we don't have grainy meringue. Now remember, there are 3 types of meringue. There's French meringue, which is just sugar and egg whites put in a mixer and you beat them. Then there's Swiss meringue, where you put sugar and egg whites into a double boiler and you heat them and then you whip them. And then this is the Italian meringue. So we're gonna cook this sugar syrup to about 240 degrees. And then we're gonna slowly drizzle into our whipped egg whites. This is the most difficult meringue, but it is also the most stable meringue. So this one's gonna last the longest, which is really nice. And because we're cooking this sugar syrup so high, it's gonna be so hot when it hits those egg whites, it's gonna make them safe to eat. You do wanna use pasteurized egg whites, especially if you're serving a high-risk population. So hopefully you can see that my sugar is starting to dissolve. Okay, so we are just at a boil, and I'm just gonna stir just to make sure we get all those crystals dissolved at this stage. I'm gonna get my mixer started because these egg whites need to be whipped at the same time as our syrup is ready. So I'm gonna get those started. Now that my sugar is all dissolved, I'm gonna take a paintbrush with my clean water, and I'm just gonna brush down the sides just to make sure if right now, if there are any extra crystals that maybe were stuck on the sides, if I knock them in now, it's fine. But if they knock themselves in a little bit later in the cooking process, then we're gonna have all of this turn into crystal, which we super don't want. So this part is pretty important. So that looks good to me. And I'm gonna keep taking my egg whites until they're just about at stiff peaks, and then I can take my thermometer and kind of monitor where I'm at. And what I like to do is just kind of look back and forth between, and this is a small amount of sugar, so I might have to kind of lean it up. And I know I'm not super close yet, so I'm at 212, 220 right now, so actually I'm closer than I thought. And you'll watch the sugar bubbles will get slower, and that's a good indication. Since we're getting close, I'm gonna get my egg whites up, and I'm watching them out of the corner of my eye to make sure that they're not gonna overbeat. It's very important. If they overbeat and they get grainy, there is nothing that you can do to save them. Okay, so my bubbles have gotten slower, and I'm gonna take the temperature, and I'm actually gonna turn off my egg whites because it looks like they're right at the right spot. Let's see, we want that 235 to 240 range, and we are exactly there with 239.9, perfect. So we're gonna turn this off the heat. I'm gonna scooch it over. And we're gonna be really careful, and it's gonna be hard to do around the camera, but I'm gonna try my best to drizzle it between where the mixer bowl is and where the beater attachment is going. I just wanna do a slow drizzle in. If I hit where the whisk attachment hits, I will kind of make it fling that sugar syrup everywhere, which is not what I want. So you gotta be crazy careful. Sugar burns are probably the worst burn you can get. A lot of people think it's fryer oil. As someone who has received both burns, I will tell you for sure that sugar burns are the worst. So if you're really nervous, a good safety tip is to have a bowl of ice cold water around whenever you're working with sugar. So if you do happen to touch it, you can quickly shock that sugar in that ice bath. So I want to make sure I get all that sugar in there, because obviously that adds sweetness, but also stability. And you can already see how much volume has changed. And maybe you can hear the lawnmower going by. My husband's doing the lawn. All right, so we are all in there. So now I'm gonna turn up my speed, and we're gonna whip it until it's gotten cool and to stiff peaks. So it's only been going for a little bit, but hopefully you can see just how glossy it's already getting. Italian meringue has this gorgeous shine to it. It's so nice and lovely. It is still, if I touch the bottom of my bowl, it's still very, very hot. So if I stop it now, it's actually not going to be very stable. So I need to make sure that this mixture has completely cooled down before I turn it off. So hopefully you can see the difference. There's a lot more kind of stronger lines when the whisk has gone through this mixture. So that's showing us that it's gotten to a nice stiff peak. My bowl has cooled down a lot, and metal always holds on to heat really, really well. So when it looks like this, and this is really kind of cool, that's usually the time where I'll kind of stop it, and I'll, with gloves on in the industry, I'll touch it and I'll feel how hot it is. If it feels room temperature, then I know that I am good to go. So our filling is set up in the fridge, and you can see if I shake it, there's no jiggle at all, which is great. So when we do go to cut into this later, it's gonna hold its shape perfectly. So here's the really awesome thing about the removable bottom is just voila, just like that. It's out. Pretty awesome. So the metal bottom is still on the bottom of this tart, and I'm actually gonna keep mine on because I don't have any other way to store this. But all you need to do is take a small offset spatula and work it underneath in between, and it'll pop right off. Very, very easy to remove. But again, I don't really have any other way to store this tart, so it's actually gonna go back in its tart pan when I'm done. It's gonna make it a lot easier for me to maneuver. So now we get to put all the finishing touches on it. So I have my meringue and my tart in a piping bag, which I have fitted with a star tip. I like to use star tips or complicated tips just because it gives a lot of texture. When I go to torch this later, it's gonna be really, really nice. You don't have to. It's really common actually now and very trendy to use a plain tip, or if you don't even have piping tips or piping bags, you could use like a plastic bag and just cut out a hole. That would totally work as well. So I'm gonna show you how to fill this, and this is a little bit harder to work with because it's a pretty tiny piping bag. This is really designed more for maybe like cookie decorating or something. You don't need a lot of stuff, but these are the only piping bags I have at home, so this is what we're gonna work with. So the best way, let me get this out of the way. Best way to fill your piping bag is turn the edges upside down. Then you open it up. Get whatever your buttercream or meringue that you're gonna use on your spatula. And then you're just gonna fill in that hole, and you can just push it up against your thumb or your hand, just like that. And I can push it down in there, just like that. And then if I've kept my edges all nice and clean, I just fold this up, shake it down, And then I keep my hands really, really clean. Now this is a little harder to do with a smaller piping bag because I'm gonna have to keep refilling it, and it's gonna get messier and messier as I go. I would use probably an 18-inch pastry bag if I was in the industry for this, but that's not what I have today, so that's not what I'm gonna use. You could get so super creative with your design. You could just do so many different things, and if you don't want to pipe it, you don't have to do that. You could just put all this on here and then take a back of a spoon or a spatula or something and make cool designs. You can be really, really creative. I am gonna pipe mine today, and I think I'm just gonna, do some kind of peaks because I kind of like how it looks a little like rock starry. Let's see. Yeah, maybe a little bit less. So I'm just gonna go around like that. Maybe kind of a little bit of a simpler version, but a fun kind of version I think my mom will like. Then I can turn it and keep going. And I am personally trying to cover up all the filling because I kind of like the element of surprise, but sometimes you might want the filling to show. Kind of depends on whatever you want. So if I'm doing this to not show the filling, when I come back through, I'm gonna go kind of in between what I've already piped so it fills in. This technique is pretty common in cake decorating. It's called star fill. But today I'm gonna call it like punk rock fill. So I'm just gonna keep on going till everything is all beautiful. Okay, so I've gone all the way around, but you can kind of see a couple little dark shadows, and I'm not worried about those at all, because watch, I can just come back here with just a very gentle hand and fill them in. And because I kind of have more of an abstract-y kind of pattern, not necessarily like a perfect pattern, it totally works, and your eye will not notice that I've done anything different, but it fills in all those little darker places that kind of stand out. So I'm gonna do that for my whole tart, and then we're gonna blowtorch this thing. So I'm happy with my piping, so I'm gonna go ahead and get my blowtorch together, and this probably looks a little bit different than some things you've seen in different places. This is a blowtorch you get like at Lowe's or Home Depot, not one of the kitchen ones. As long as you don't use this on anything else, it's totally fine to use this, and they're way cheaper and they're way sturdier, and the tanks are way bigger, so they last way longer. All sounds better to me, so I always get my blowtorches from one of the big home improvement stores. So I'm gonna turn it till I can hear that gas, Then I'm gonna hit it on, and that torch is gonna be very strong. So then I'm gonna crank it back because I don't wanna, wrong way. I don't want to burn my lovely meringue. I just want to toast it. And then as I go, I'm gonna keep it moving because if I stay still, it's gonna burn. You're gonna see those peaks are gonna get nice and toasty. So all those edges are just so nice. That gives this huge contrast between the brown and the white, which is what we love so much about meringue. And if you don't have a blowtorch at home, you can do this in the broiler on your oven just for a couple of minutes. Watch it very carefully. It'll look a little bit different. It'll be a little paler brown, but it'll still give pretty much the same effect. And you're just gonna do this until you're happy with the look. Try to make it as even as possible. Also, your house is gonna smell like toasted marshmallow right about now. So that's pretty awesome. And I am just about happy with that. I like to have pretty contrasty colors. I don't really like it to be super light. I like to make sure I get the edges. Those contrasting colors also is gonna translate into really awesome flavor. Just like if you were toasting a marshmallow, The darker you get, the more kind of bitter notes that you'll get, which is really nice because meringue is so sweet, just like at the fire pit. If you toast your marshmallow, that bitterness from the flame goes really well with the sweet. So I'm gonna add a little bit of some pops of color. So I have some pretty cute little tiny strawberries that I got from the farmer's market. And they're so itty bitty. They are gorgeous and bright red. I think that's gonna look really pretty. So I washed them and I dried them really well, and I'm gonna just kind of experiment with what I want it to look like. So sometimes a lot of people cut slices, and slices are pretty too, but I like to cut little rounds sometimes because I think they look really cute, almost like little polka dots. And again, I think I'm gonna stick with my kind of abstract look that I've been going with. Maybe a little big. I love tiny little, dainty fruit. It feels so special. So I want to get it nice and thin, because again, that's going to help make it look extra dainty, which is nice. And then as strawberries sit out, after they're cut, they kind of look a little dry. So what I usually like to do is take a little bit of apricot jam and water it down a little bit and just brush it on top, and it'll make it stay shiny the whole time. I don't have any apricot jam, so I'm actually going to try a little bit of cornstarch. So if I would usually use a small brush, but I don't have a small food-friendly brush at home. But if I just use my finger, it kind of gives just almost like a permanent kind of shine, which is really nice. And I think I might just make them, kind of random, just little pops of color. Don't know, I don't really have a plan. Sometimes that's the best, right? Kind of have them sitting up randomly. And I'll just keep putting on strawberry slices till I'm happy with how everything looks. So I'm happy with my strawberry placement. Again, I'm going for that kind of abstract, nouveau kind of look. And now I'm gonna add some pops of green. A lot of times see on tarts, people leave the green of the strawberry on. I am not at all a huge fan of that, because you can't eat that. And you put something on food, you're telling your customers that they can eat it, and you can't eat that because it's disgusting. So I don't like to do that, even though some people will. I don't think it's nice. So I'm actually gonna use some mint, and my bakers know that I'm not a fan of mint typically, because mint is a really strong flavor, and chefs overuse mint a lot because it looks really pretty and it's a nice easy way to add some pop of green to your dessert. But I do know that mint goes with my dessert. Mint doesn't go with every single dessert out there. Lots of desserts, mint is way too powerful of a flavor for. So I know that mint goes really well with lime, and that mint goes really well with strawberry. So I know that this flavor is gonna be fine. I'm also, if you can see, I'm using these itty bitty leaves. So if you look at how the leaves grow, at the very top of the stem, there's always itty bitty leaves. So if you use those leaves, it's a lot less of a mint punch than if you get like a giant leaf that your guest might eat. So I'm only using the baby ones. And again, I know that my flavors go well. And it's also the only green element I have. I'm actually growing this mint. I'm not growing it. Senor Chonko is growing this mint. So I know that it's nice and fresh, because I literally, as soon as I stopped cutting these strawberries, I went outside and picked it. So it's incredibly fresh. So I'm gonna add my little mint leaves all around until I'm happy, and then that's gonna be the last step. Okay, so we're all done with my kind of modern top, and I'm loving it. So this tart is all ready to go. I hope you enjoyed this demonstration today.